It's supposed to come from that
Yeah.
kind of a personality. Wow. Welcome
Yeah.
also to Herb Haber, who's online. I think that's it, Rabbi Grauman.
Okay.
Over to
Very
you.
good.
I think
So-
if you, for a moment, just we take note, it was a short notice in the shorts. Morris Wasatsky, Elva Shalom,
All right.
one of the pioneers at the old shul at University Boulevard, and then for many years lived on Kersey and was at the Kent Mill Shul. Very, very friendly guy. He was an officer for many years of the shul, treasurer, financial secretary, and quite a nice guy. Passed away last week in Renana.
I forgot to
Neshama should
thank you.
Aliyah for all of us.
Yeah.
Torah learning for all.
Special man, very patient with everybody who would speak with him. He was a man that he had such infinite patience when you spoke to him after davening or whatever. It was
Yeah. I was saying Tehillim and Mishaberach for a very dear friend of mine who was unfortunately lifted this week, Avram ben Bela, Avram ben Gittel, Avram ben Gittel. So the family's still sitting Shiva, and the Neshama should also be an Aliyah for all of us.
Amen.
All right, so we're on Yud Amid Aleph. Yud Amid Aleph, the Mishnah, about 2/3 down. And we're going to turn sort of the corner and we talk about something a little bit different, which was touched on by a couple of questions last week. You'll remember when we go through the Mishnah, the previous Mishnah dealt with a person who saw Metzia, asked his friend to pick it up for him, and there's a whole shaklavataria as to whether or not the person was his shaliach or whether he did it for himself, and it's very nuanced as to what the different aspects of that situation are. Now, the Mishnah talks about something really quite different and in many ways very surprising. Says the Mishnah, Rosa Metzia, or Nafal Aleha. If someone is walking along and he sees a Metzia, he sees a shiny silver dollar on the ground, Tefker, but Nafal Aleha, and he falls on it. So what does it mean he falls on it? That means he doesn't pick it up. He literally covers it up.
It's like a team from Washington kind of play. You just put your whole body over.
Cover him. Exactly.
Cover up.
Perfect word. He covers it up. And someone comes and grabs it and actually makes a hichzik. He makes a hagbal, let's say, he lifts it up or does something. The person who did the chazaka is zacha. So what do we have here? One person is walking along, sees the dollar, falls on it. Another person sort of jumps into the melee, but he takes it and he lifts it. Now, what does this remind us of? Remember, in the last weeks, we've had the whole shaila, person who jumps on a horse and does nothing but sit on the horse. Is he kinda or not for sitting on the horse? He didn't do anything. He just jumped on the horse. So this is a little bit different, but basically he is not doing a action of what we would describe as kinyan, not a hagbah, meshicha, mesira, all the different forms of kinyan he didn't do, but he fell on it. All right. So under that circumstance, says the Mishnah, that if someone jumps into on top of him and actually picks it up, then he's kind of.
Question.
Yeah.
I know I've seen, so many years ago, I remember seeing something about an issue that if on somebody on Shabbos obviously would be muksa, you couldn't pick it up. But if somebody saw a coin in the street and he just sort of stood by it, or maybe even covered up with whatever, but basically stood by it, whether he could stand by it like till the end of Shabbos and then take it. And I wonder how that would relate to this kind of thing.
Right, because you couldn't do anything on Shabbos. Now, if he was Mechalel Shabbos and made a kinyan, the kinyan would be valid. He would be Mechalel Shabbos, but he'd make a kinyan and it would be his because he made a kinyan. So here, of course, he didn't do it because he's an Erlich Yid and he doesn't want to be Mechalel Shabbos. and he didn't make a kinyan. First thing Motzei Shabbos, someone walks by and literally beats him to the punch, then that second person, no, there's no points for guarding. I guess that's the point. There's no points for guarding. You can guard it. People have even taken a napkin and covered it. I mean, there's discussion about what happens if you do that, but that's not a kinyan. Those are all ways of sort of, okay, I don't want anybody else to see it, but there's no kinyan here. The first kinyan that comes along.
I'm sorry, but you raised an interesting question. I always think about the fruit of the poison tree. So you're saying that even if you do an Avera and you pick up the money, you see a $100 bill, you pick up the money on Shabbos and make a kinyan, that's an acceptable kinyan, even though you're doing an Avera to implement that kinyan.
That's correct, because they are two separate tracks. The Avera is the Avera, that's for, but it has nothing to do. The Avera does not prevent or thwart someone from making a kinyan. You shouldn't do it, but if you do it,
it's acceptable. Okay.
So it's not a mitzvah hababa Avera.
It's kind of like a mitzvah. There's no mitzvah here, right? But it's in that vein, exactly. If you think about it that way. All right. So that's the Mishnah. Very simple. Now, from this is going to come numerous questions, very interesting questions. So basically, we have someone who's walking along, sees a Metzia, jumps on the Metzia, falls on the Metzia, as it were, and does nothing other than, he's on top of it. Someone else comes and makes a chazaka. The person who makes the chazaka is kind of, okay, maybe not that difficult to fathom, but the question is, why is the person who jumped on it not kind of? That's what the Gemara is going to tell us. And it's going to be mechadish to us, not mechadish, but reveal to us several important principles. Amar Rish Lakish, Misham Abba Koyin Bardala. Rish Lakish says in the name of Abba Koyin Bardala, Arba Amish al Adam Konus Lo B'chol Makom. Listen to this. Arba Amis, in a person's Arba Amis, Dalet Amis. That's an expression, Dalet Amis. We always know a person Dalet Amis, right? The Dalet Amis of a person are kona for him b'chol makom, in every place or every direction. My tama, why? Tekini rabbanan also la'ansuye. The rabbis, this is midrabanan now. The rabbis instituted a provision so as not to come to machlekes. Ansuye is machlekes. So as not to come to machlekes, if something is within the Dalet Amis of a person, we say it belongs to that person. So someone coming along shouldn't then invade his privacy, his Dalet Amis, and take it away. So that
would seem to be logical only if it's in public property.
Right.
Else's private property wouldn't be his.
Right.
Except today, when you have social distancing, you don't want to invade someone.
You don't want anybody in your Dalet Amis, right? But David, you're going to be surprised to hear the answer to that point. So we'll wait a little bit, and then we're going to see what the discussion is. So David, your position is that it's not in Rishus HaRabim, but in Rishus HaYachid, right?
No, in Rishus HaRabim, this would be valid, but if you were in somebody else's private property,
okay,
it would not be valid.
Okay, so let's wait to reveal that in a couple of minutes. So let's look at the Rashi. V'im Taima Mishnoseinu. Have we reached that point yet? I mean, it's a good explanation from our Gemara. All right, so let's look at the Rashi. V'im Taima Mishnoseinu. The second wide line. Diktoni ani zachisi ba zachaba. Umashma lon ani zeichaba achshav zachaba. Va'afa. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Okay, no, that Rashi is previous. All right, so that's the Mishnah. There's no Rashi here. The Mishnah is very straightforward. So Rav Shlakish says, and he brings down from Abardala, that Arba Amis shal Adam Kanas B'chol Makom, because of this principle. So, okay, that's the Gemara. Now, Oma Abaya, Moshe Rab Chia Bar Yosef Peya. Abaya says that Rab Chia Bar Yosef asks a kasha on Rosh Lakish's principle that he just announced from a Gemara in Peya. Omar Rava, and Rava says most of Rav Yaakov Ba'idi Nezikin that Rav Yaakov Ba'idi asks a similar kasha on Rav Shlokish's pronouncement from Nezikin, from Masech Nezikin, which actually turns to be our case. But in other words, Rav Shlokish, you made a sort of a pronouncement and said, Arba Amas Shalom Konos Lo B'chol Makom. Why? Because of Machlokes. So I'll ask you Kashis. So Abai and Rava, he said there's Kashis on him from two different sources. Let's understand. Oma Abaya, Moshe Reb Chia Bar Yosef. Reb Chia Bar Yosef asks from Peah, what's the case of Peah? What is Peah? Peah means the corner of, if a person is a farmer, that the corner of his field, you should always leave unharvested, because that is for the aniyim. The aniyim should know that in every field, the corners are reserved for them so that they can have what to eat. So here's the case in the Gemara in Peah. Notel mixes Peah. An ani takes some of the Peah. Okay, he takes the Peah. So l'chayr what? He owns the Peah. V'zorek al hashar, and then he takes the Peah that he has uprooted from the ground and he throws it over the Peah that hasn't yet been harvested. It's still part of the corner, still part of the Peah, but he can't get to it all at one time. So he harvests some of it, he takes some of it, takes it, and he throws it on the rest of it. It's kind of like when we were kids and each of us, there was one chocolate bar and two kids were fighting over it. So what did the one guy do? So he licked it. He says, now it's his because the other guy can't get it. He licked it. It's already his. So here he's thinking, I'll take the Peah that I just took. I'll throw it on the other Peah and it's going to be mine because I just actually did something. So Zok the Gemara, there in Peah, ein loy ba klum. It's as if he did nothing. And not only as if he did nothing, but even the Peah that he threw is also not his. Because basically he took the Peah and he threw it as if to say, you know, this is mine, but I want to be kind of everything. So the Mishnah in Peah there says that you lose it all. Okay, you lose it all. Nofel lo aleo. Oh, this is now our Mishnah. What happens if he fell on it? Or paras talisa oleo, or he took a talis and he covered the whole thing. That's the same as kind of covering, right? Falling, covering. He covered it with a talis or a rag or a cloth. Marvirin oisai hamena, and we take it away from him. So,
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Why, when he picked up the Peah, he didn't make a kinyan? He was authorized to take Peah. The minute before he threw it, it should be his based on all that we've learned so far. He made a kinyan, a valid kinyan. What he does with it, to store it somewhere or to hide it or wherever, it shouldn't change the kinyan.
All right, it's a good question. Wait, we'll discuss it, but it's a good point. L'chayra, he was kind of right away, but here the Gemara says we penalize him. We penalize him for overreaching because he tried to do a trick and he tried to. In other words, this is not quite like the case of the creditor that we had, where there's a number of creditors and you want to take the whole thing away and deny other creditors. So what's he doing? He got this corner of the field. He wants to take it all for himself. He says, I'm the first person in. I'm quickly going to take a few stalks, throw it on the rest of it, and everybody else is going to be out in the cold. So in a way, it's kind of like a penalty, a punishment for overreaching. But we'll hold
question.
on.
When he's covering it now, I understand he takes the stuff and he throws it into the corner, and we penalize him by saying, effectively, in a sense, almost that he's gotten rid of it. He can't double up and instead he loses it all. Fine. If he covers it here, are we saying that he's covering up the stuff that's on top of the other uncut Peah, or is it that he cut the stuff, put it in a little pile, and then covered it up rather than schlepping it away?
No. Two separate instances. One instance where he cut and threw.
Right.
Second instance, he didn't cut at all.
Right.
Okay, so what he's covering up is he's saying, this is going to be mine, but he hasn't actually cut it.
Right.
And in both instances, the remainder that we're not letting him have wasn't physically detached yet.
Correct.
Maybe that's the essence.
Correct. It was not physically detached.
Because if he could have physically detached the whole corner and said, all mine, it would have been okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's kind of just stalking here.
Right. In his haste to be the first one in stalking, right? Where's Scott? In his haste, in his haste to be the first one in, he wants to sort of grab everything. So he takes a talus and whips it out and covers a large area, or he falls on it, or this or the other. So
that was a straw man.
The straw man, right. It also says the Gemara b'chein ba'omer. Shikha. Remember, besides peah, there's something else. There's something called shikha. Shikha means that you harvest and you forget about a portion. You can't go back. Let's say you were cutting the field, you cut the whole field, and the harvester that you use, you didn't do it symmetric, and you forgot one. Oh, I have to go back, and my harvester didn't go over that part of the field. The Torah says shikha. It's not yours. If you forget it, if you passed it by and you didn't come back to it within the normal course, you can't remind yourself and say, oh, I've got to go back and clean up that which I didn't harvest. It belongs to the aniyim. In other words, leket, shikha, peah, these are all, for instance, you gather and you have stalks that drop, that fall out of the sheaves. Also not yours. In other words, the Torah tells us that you have to be sensitive rather to the aniyim, and they get leket, shikha, peah. These are different gleanings from the field that you intentionally or unintentionally left over. Okay, but now, frek the Gemara, v'i amrit arba amos shel adam chonos lo b'chol makom niknu le arba amos today. If you say Rish Lakish that arba amos shel adam chonos lo b'chol makom, right? The pronouncement that Rish Lakish made, then why in all these cases of peah are you not koneh? It's arba amos. We're not talking about half a field away. We're talking someone goes into the field, cuts part of it, and throws it. Where's he throwing it? He's throwing it right near him. I mean, clearly within Dalet Amos, or he falls on it, or he puts a talus on it. He's not covering hundreds of Amos. He's covering Dalet Amos, or maybe a little bit more. But why should the Dalet Amos not be his? Rish Lakish said beferish, because of machlokes, it should belong to him. Good kasha. Good kasha. So in other words, this is the kasha from peah on Rish Lakish. You say that it's permissible. The Gemara in peah says beferish, nothing doing. You can't take it. Answers the Gemara there, hocha b'maya skinan. You know the circumstance that we're talking about? The lo oma ekna, where when he threw the peah, listen to this, or he covered it, he didn't pronounce, I am being kind of this food or this wheat. He didn't say it. He didn't enunciate it. Frek the Gemara, the tikkun rabbanon. If this is a tikkun rabbanon that arba amos belongs to you, kilo omer my hava. What's the big deal that he didn't announce it? The whole point of the tikkun is that it should be automatic. The chachamim have been misakein that if a person has something in his Dalet Amos, he may not even know that it's in his Dalet Amos, but it is in his Dalet Amos, it's his. That's the principle. The Dalet Amos is kind of like there's a protective shield around Dalet Amos, and somebody from the outside can't then take it away from him. If that's the case, why does he have to announce, I'm being kinda? It has to be by itself that this tikkun rabbanon works. That's the kasha. So the Gemara gives an interesting answer and says, Kiven the nofel, goli date de benefila nichale de nikna, ba'arba amaslo lichale de nikna. Very, very, a little difficult to understand, but the Gemara says that since he fell on it, he is showing that the kinyan that he wants to make is through nefila, is through falling on it, and therefore he is eschewing, he is saying, I don't want to make a kinyan under the rabbinic statement of arba amos. I want to make it through nefila. So basically he's rejecting the principle of Dalet Amos in favor of nefila. All right, let's do the Rashis because this, you can ask that this is a very shvera thing, but let's take a look at Rashi. So the Rashi Konaslo in Yesh Sivivosa of Dava Hefker, if there's something Hefker, Ein acher rishon l'toifsoi, then a person cannot reach into his domain and take it because it's within his daled amas. So the Omar Baya, most of Rabbi Hyatt Allah to Yufta, the Mishnah the Masechtas Peya, and Omar Rava, most of Rabbi Yaakov Allah Mishnah the Seder Nezikim, which is our Mishnah, by the way. So there's these two kashas. So now, what's the case? Notel echad min ha'aniyim miktzas Peya shaliket kvar, that he already had gathered. He gathered. In other words, that should be his, right? You just said it, Chaim. That he cut it. It's his, okay. And now what does he do? V'zorak alashar kidei liknos. So the part that he was kona, he throws onto another part of the payah to be kona. Liknele gabi nofel lo oleo arba amos the tikkun rabbanan. Or he's kinda because he falls on the 4 amos that the rabbis were misakin. So it says Rashi, "Benefila nichale de nikne lo niskaven likna betoris takonas chachamim kasavash nifiloso yofel lo." So the Rashi is telling us that this daled amis question, is it automatic or is it not automatic? So you could say that it's automatic.
Unless you reject it, unless you demonstrate that you're doing something which is of its own nature, not related to what the Chachamim recited.
So what's the havamina? The havamina is that you are kind of with daled amis. In other words, without thinking about it, you're kind of from daled amis. What happens if loinis gavenlik? He now has a de jure thought. He has an active thought to say, I don't want to be kind of the way the Chachamim have allowed me to be kind of. I don't know why you would do that, but if that's what he did, the Gemara comes to tell us you can reject. This is the point. You can reject that Takanas Chachamim. You can reject the Takanas Chachamim in favor of another form of kinyan. Then the kasha is that other form of kinyan going to work? So what you've done is you have wheedled out of ownership into non-ownership. Because we are saying here that this doesn't work, that nafel doesn't work. So what you've done is you've taken what would be yours, you've undone it through an act that doesn't give you bilas.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi, this is Yale. So we're giving the average person a lot of credit. We're assuming that he knows about that the daled amas is kona, and he's actively choosing not to accept it, as opposed to somebody maybe like me who doesn't know most of the rules. I see something I want, I just jump on it. I'm not, in my mind, in other words, we're giving him a lot of credit that he knows about the daled amas, he's intentionally rejecting it, as opposed to the fact that he's just trying to do whatever he can to acquire it. He thinks jumping on it is the way to do it, so he does it.
Right. So to your point, I don't know that everybody knew it. But we impute that it's yours. If you did nothing, who came along and someone invaded your daled amas, we would tell him, he went to Bezdin, and look, he said to Bezdin, look, there was something in my daled amas. I'm not very smart. I didn't know. Someone then came and took it, and then a friend of mine came over and said, you should go to Bezdin because it was yours. Why is it mine? Because it was your daled amas. So in other words, you don't necessarily impute that he knew. Someone told him after the fact when this incident happened, and he said, you know what, you have rights to this. I have rights? What are my rights? Because it was your daled amas. So he goes to Bezdin, and Bezdin says, yes, you have rights. It's your daled amas. You're correct. So you don't necessarily have to say that. But to the point of, I mean, if a guy knew all of this, why would he? What's the seichel of jumping on it if in fact he would have known that jumping doesn't work? I mean, it's kind of like counterintuitive.
And there's nobody there to give him basra either, conveniently.
Right. So here he automatically is kinda, and now he's giving it up because he's doing something which, hello, what are you doing? You're taking it out of your domain. Now it's no longer yours. So again, the point is that at this point, we don't slug up Rosh Lakish, because Rosh Lakish says daled amas is yours, and it really would help. Why do you not get it? You don't get it. So we tried to say because he didn't announce. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, announcing it has nothing to do with it. It's an automatic thing. So he says, no, it really wasn't about announcing. It was about undoing the chazaka that you have of Daled Amos. So if you deliberately undo it, you're right, you don't have it. But Rosh Lakish says, if you don't deliberately undo it, and even Riel, you don't know about it, and it comes to pass, it's yours, and you can take it to Bezdin, and Bezdin will give it to you because you are the rightful owner. Okay? So there was an attempted shlug from Peah, and the Gemara answered it, it's not a kasha from Peah. Okay? So Rosh Lakish's principle applies. Okay. Now,
question?
Yeah.
It's not clear to me from the way this is discussed. Is this individual alone, or is there someone with them? Is there someone nearby or can see this? And if they are alone, does that affect how they can acquire an item?
Well, let's put it this way. To David's point, because David made an interesting point before by saying Rishus Harabim, which we're going to see in a minute. People are walking around. No, this isn't isolated. People are walking around, and this fellow is walking, and all of a sudden he stops, and in his Daled Amos is an item. And says, okay, this is my item. Comes somebody else and wants to grab it. In other words, he didn't grab it. He just stopped, looked down, and said, oh, fine. Someone comes along and grabs it. Again, if you want to talk about Peah, let's talk about Peah. Talking about an ani comes to the field, and in that corner of the field is a beautiful corner full of grain of wheat, and he says, "Wow, I'm gonna have this now for a long time because it's all gonna be mine." So he figures out how can he get it in the shortest amount of time. So he says, "Well, okay, I'm gonna quickly start. I don't have the time to cut all of this. I'll never make it. So I happen to have brought along this very large cloth that I was going to use it for a picnic." He spreads the whole cloth over the Peah, and he says, "It's now mine." So the answer is, someone comes and starts picking the Peah. So, "What are you doing, taking my Peah?" And all of a sudden, we find out, he says, "Oh, wait a minute. This is," and he goes to Bezdin, of course, and the Bezdin says, "Well, this is what you did. Sorry, it's not your Peah." So it's not isolated. It's in a circumstance where other people see it, and there's a whole shaklavitaria going on as to what is right and what is not. So Rosh Lakish wants to make the pronouncement that everybody has Daled Amos. We know this Chazal tells us that in the Mokam HaMikdash, as crowded as it was, right? Shishim Ribui, 600,000, maybe 1 million, who knows? And everybody had Daled Amos. Daled Amos is not, it's not a postage stamp. It's a little bit bigger, because Daled Amos shel Adam is kirishusel. That's what we learned from that a person's domain is Daled Amos. I think Chaim or someone just said, someone comes up close to someone and he's responsible, "Don't get into my space." Okay, don't stick your nose in my space, especially now in COVID, but don't stick in my space. Why? Because I have Daled Amos. This Daled Amos, this theoretical Daled Amos, is mine. What's in this domain is mine, and therefore don't invade it. So that's the principle that we're working with. Okay, so now the kasha from Peah is answered that he went ahead and undid the chazaka that Rosh Lakish says he has. Now, let's turn the page. Okay, so that was the first kasha. Now, so Yudah Midbeis the top. Rav Papa, so where did this take place? So David, to your point, okay, so we know the situation. Now, where does this take place that Rosh Lakish says this principle? Rav Papa says, Ki tekinele Rabbanon arba amas ba'alma. When the Rabbanim gave a person in other words, he quoted that it's a Tekanos Chachamim, arba amas is ba'alma. Rashi, Hachagasina ki tekinele Rabbanon ba'alma, kugon besimta. Simta is an alley. Shehu reshus l'chol adam. It's a public thoroughfare. Over reshus harabim, says Rashi, or in a legitimate reshus harabim. Obitzide Rishus Harabim, or on the sides, the side road of the Rishus Harabim. Vihi hefker l'rabim, limshoch l'tocha hatzricha lotzes min hadchak, and it's a hefker area for the rabbim to squeeze into, to get away from the dchak, from the narrowness or from the pressure of the Rishus Harabim. So according to Rav Papa, the Ba'alma in the open air includes three categories: a simta, an alleyway, not a Rishus HaYochid, not a private domain, a simta, an alleyway, which we know what that is, right? A Rishus Harabim, a legitimate Rishus Harabim, or Sidei Rishus Harabim, sort of the side roads of the Rishus Harabim. In other words, the main thoroughfare, and once you get right off the main thoroughfare, it's still within the main thoroughfare, but it's not where people are sort of thronging. And there, if you want to pull somebody over for a conversation, you pull them to the side. Things are going on around you, but you're not mamish in the middle of the whole throng. So the point is that Rav Papa is telling us it's really in a public place. No question. He goes on to say, Besana de Balabayas, lo takina le rabbanan. But in a private domain, now this is the important point, in a private domain, then this principle does not apply. It doesn't apply. Even though the Torah allowed a person to have certain rights, begave in a field. What is a field? A field is a private domain. It's not a public domain. So now, this might look like a stira, because you're telling me it can only apply to a public domain, not a private, but yet here the ani is going into a private field. Says the Gemara right away, Ki zachale rachmana lo lichabol and puyapeya. Lamahave chatzera lo zachale. In other words, it's a exception to the rule that in a private place you may not exercise this domain, but the Torah gave certain benefits under certain limited conditions where you can go into the private domain and you're zocher. It doesn't mean that you can, because after all, a person has chusim in his own field. So now you're going to be having a clash between a person's chusim in his own field and someone who comes in from outside who wants chusim. So the Torah tells us no. This is not socialism. You own your own field. It's yours. We make a special takana, an exception, under certain circumstances. What are they? Leket, shikha, and peah. Torah specifically said, leket, shikha, and peah. You can go. You don't have to ask permission, by the way. This is important. You don't have to knock on the gate and say, can I come in and take it? No such thing. It's yours. The Torah tells the balabos it's not yours, and tells the ani it is yours. So you have the right to come in and gather leket, shikha, and peah, and the balabas cannot tell you. But in the whole, you have no zechusim at all in the greater property, if you will, of somebody else. Okay, so
I think we're going to find out. I think in another parsha or so about rights to eat if you're passing through somebody's private property. Also, you can
correct,
eat, right?
Correct.
The tree, but not put it into your satchel.
Exactly. Also, or even your animal. Remember, you know, the Eliezer, the great Sidkas of Eliezer, when he was going to see Rivka, and he had the animals. He did not allow an animal to stray to the right or the left, because you know it was the low-hanging fruit, as we say. So what's the big thing? Because that was Geneva. It was Geneva. It belongs to somebody else. It's not like a chick or a payer there. It's literally taking someone else's food. That's how makbid Chazal is telling us you have to be on someone else, that you can't even, oh, it's not a big thing, it was a branch, it was hanging over. No, it doesn't belong to you. You can't take it. Right. Okay. So this was the explanation that Rav Papa gave, which we'll see is not universally held, but Rav Papa's interpretation of what is allowed is in a public place, and in a private place only for the mitzvah of payah in this case. Omar Rava, weiter. So now Rava comes And he says, I'm going to ask a kasha on Rosh Lakish from Nezikin. Nezikin, we're learning Nezikin, and it happens to be our Mishnah. Most of Rabbi Yaakov eating Nezikin. Roes HaMetzia, what does our Mishnah say? Roes HaMetzia v'nofalo aleo, v'bo echet v'hichzik bo, zeh shehichzik bo zocha bo. Right? That we just said that. Frek the Gemara, v'amrid arba amas shalom konos lo b'chol makom. If you follow the principle of Rosh Lakish, that arba amas is kind of b'chol makom, nikle arba amas today. Then the arba amas, he should be zeicha because of the arba amas right away. Okay, in other words, he's walking along, and he didn't even have a chance to fall on it. It's his. Same kasha. And for the Gemara, the same way. He didn't say, I'm doing this l'shein kinyan. In other words, he makes sort of a hidden imuchan mezuman. I'm about to fall on this property because I'm making a kinyan. All right, he didn't do it. Frek the Gemara v'i tikkun rabbanan kilo oma mai hava. If it's a tikkun rabbanan, if the rabbis established a principle, then there's no such thing. You have to make a hidden imuchan mezuman, that you have to say specifically, I'm going to do it. It's yours. It is yours because of the tikkun chachamim. And for the Gemara, the same way we did in the Gemara in Peah, given the nofel olea, goli date de benefila nichale de nikne, ba arba ams lo nichale de nikne. So now we have the very same answer again, that what? That you can undo a takonas chachamim. The chachamim make a takana. The takana is there for you. It's for your protection. Apparently, and clearly, yes, you can reject that takana chachamim. It isn't binding on you. The question would be, if it was a deraisa, if the Torah gave us a takana, would you be able to reject a takanas deraisa? That's the question.
That's the question. Yeah.
That's a good question, right? Takanas chachamim, you say, okay, the rabbis did it. Why did they do it? They did it for your benefit. Even deraisa is for your benefit. But rabbinic decrees, we know, are not as severe. They're not as machmir as Torah decrees. If you had a Torah decree, can you voluntarily reject the Torah decree? It's something to have to think about. Under what circumstance would, if there was a Torah decree, can you say, I'm vitiating that decree, I'm doing something different? Okay, we're not talking about an Aveira. In other words, we have to think about, again, and I haven't given it full thought, but it's just a question that comes to mind, is if you have a deraisa that is to your benefit, can you reject a deraisa? A rabbanan, clearly you can, but a deraisa, so we'll have to think about that. And unless
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Rabbi, it's I'm still missing a piece here, and I apologize, but
okay. No problem.
I'll tell you, I'm not seeing the logic, because if we're assuming that he understands that Dalet Amos acquires, and he's choosing not to use that, but rather he wants to fall on it. So if his intent is to acquire, right? His intent is, he clearly wants to acquire because he's falling on it. So if his intent is to acquire, then, and he's mistaken thinking that he can't, that he could acquire by falling on it, but rather he's mistaken about that. Why are we saying, okay, you understand that you could acquire by Dalet Amos? Why would he choose to try and acquire it in some other way if he's already acquired it by simply standing there? In other words, he wants it.
Okay.
He's within Dalet Amos, he gets it. And he says, you know what?
It doesn't matter. He demonstrably showed what he showed. I mean, it's all
but I guess, well, where's the logic? In other words, we're looking at his actions. You know, we said we want to understand his actions, right? So his action is, I want it. I want to acquire it. Given that he wants to acquire it, why don't we say clearly he wants to acquire it? So when he stood within Dalet Amos, that's it.
Okay.
He wants to acquire it. He gets within Dalet Amos. He acquired it. The fact that he then does something else.
He did, until a moment later he rejected. That's...
Okay. So yeah. Let me give you an example. He comes into the field, and he's standing there. So the chayra, the Dalet Amos measured from where he's standing, should all be his, right? Okay. What did this Mishnah in Peah tell us? This guy was a little bit of a, let's call him a little bit of a chazer. He didn't want the Dalet Amos. He wanted all the Amos.
He wanted more.
He wanted more. So he took a cover. He's a big guy. His Dalet Ames, if he falls, is more than Dalet Ames. He took a talis, which is more than Dalet Ames. So he wanted more than what he got. You know what? Not only do you not get the Dalet Ames, you don't get anything. So in other words, think of it this way, that you're right. Why should I fall on this little piece of ground when by standing it, I own it? That would be ridiculous. Teretz is because, you know, the old expression is a Talmudic expression, but kol hamosif goreya. Someone wants more than what he's entitled, goreya, he gets less. It's kind of a takeoff of that. He says, "What? Well, there's nothing wrong. I want this whole corner."
I hear.
Palace, right? You have your
Wall-
4. No, I want 8.
Right, the Wall Street expression is pigs get fed,
Fat and hogs get slaughtered.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Yes, thank you.
So this is the halachic context of that, Chaim. It's very good.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Chaim.
Right. So you have to look at it that way, because you're right. Otherwise, it makes no sense. If he's got it already, what is he doing? He already has it. Teretz says he wants more, and the Gemara tells us now you're not going to get anything. You're going to wind up with nothing because you didn't do anything. Okay. So then the Gemara asks the kasha also from our Mishnah, and essentially the Gemara wants to give the same answer that it just gave, which is that the nichale ba'arba ames. Okay, now comes Rav Sheshes. So that's the principle. So at this point, we still have not slugged up Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish's principle is still a valid principle, and we gave an answer as to why it doesn't apply here is because he didn't allow it to apply. He wanted another principle to apply in lieu of the Dalet Ames. Rav Sheshes Omer.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
I'm losing you word, but let me just step back with you on that other, because he's in his Dalet Amos, he acquires it,
right?
But maybe he wasn't knowledgeable that he knew exactly what the rules were, so he maybe thought, well, maybe I have to touch it, and that's why he fell on it. Not that he wanted to secure it with 2 items.
Right. So
we're looking at it that the person may have been knowledgeable. I don't know if
this question. Yeah, I think Yael or someone touched on that same issue before. So, in the time of the Gemara, if he came to Bezdin and made that argument and said, "What do I know? I'm a farmer. I never learned. I don't know this thing about Dalet Ames," right? So, arguably, the Bezdin might accept that. Again, we're talking in a circumstance where we know. In other words, the Gemara is assuming the people know the halacha, and this is how we approach it. In a circumstance where someone doesn't know the halacha, I don't know if the Bezdin would give him a dispensation and say, you know what, you didn't know, we'll give it to you, or would say, now you know. And now you know.
Ignorance of the law is no defense. That's,
Yeah, there you go. Ignorance of the law. So again, if it's but our Bezdin is not just a court of law; it's a court of equity. So the Bezdin has to look at the equity. So if someone came and Taka and Nabach, he doesn't know. So what does he know? I gotta physically take that. I've never been given anything in my life. I've got to go and get it. Whereas this would have been given to him, then, Now, on the other hand, one might argue that in the times of the Gemara, or certainly in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, that David people weren't ignorant, and that they actually knew basic law, and that an ani would essentially know that if I go into the field and I get paya, these are the rules. Anything in my Dalet Ames is mine. If I try to get more than Dalet Ames, then a whole different set of rules apply. So in other words, it could well be that in the time of the Torah, where Peah applied, like a chicken play applied, that people were more knowledgeable than we might say today, where people now are ignorant of the law, right? We have so many people who never had an education, never had an opportunity of learning a Blat Gemara or understanding the principles behind the halacha. So it's more of a we can ask that question.
But it's apparent that he doesn't. It's apparent that he wasn't learned, because
Apparently,
if he did both, if he was learned, he'd know it. It was in the Dalet Amos.
Right. So we're assuming that he was a little piggish and he wanted more than he was entitled to. But you're right. If he didn't know the law at all and he came to Bezdin, then as a court of equity, the Bezdin might have said, okay, you know what? You didn't know. That might have happened. I can't answer it. That might have happened. But certainly after the first time, it's never going to happen again. So I think you have to take that with a grain of salt as to whether or not the person can argue, I don't know from anything. I know that I have to go get something. Nothing's given to me. I don't know from Dalet Amos. I'm going to get it. So
right, and countering that, there's a compelling state interest in seeing to it that people are brawling over Peah in the fields.
That was the point. See,
that's the whole point. Yeah.
That was exactly Rish Lakish's point, is that a person shouldn't have to fight for at least the minimal amount that he can get, which is Dalet Amos. Right? Okay, so David, it's not a clear answer, but we have to sort of look at it from both sides. Okay, now comes Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says, and Rav Sheshes now is responding to Rav Papa. What did Rav Papa say on the top of the daf? When does this apply? Ba'alma. In other words, in the public domain, but not in the private domain. Rav Sheshes Omar, ki tekini rabbanon besimta. Now, if you remember the Rashi that we learned on top said, Kagom besimta. Simta is an alley. Rishus l'chol adam. It's a public thoroughfare, but it's not a Rishus Harabim, right? A Rishus Harabim means a Rishus Harabim, multitudes of people. A simta doesn't belong to anybody, but it's an alley where less people would go. So Rav Papa includes simta, Rishus Harabim, Tzidei Rishus Harabim. Comes Rav Sheshes, and he says, Kisakinu Rabbanon besimta dochka rabim. Because people aren't on top of each other, they're not pushing each other. Rishus Harabim deko dochke rabim lo takinu rabbanon. Rav Sheshes is taking a different view. David, to your point earlier when you said Rishus Harabim, that's the logic. According to Rav Sheshes, it can't be in a Rishus Harabim. It has to be in a place where people can at least be sanguine enough that they can have a conversation. Again, no one is saying a Rishus HaYachid. No one is saying that you can, it's in a private person's domain. In other words, you can't go into a private person's domain and help yourself to whatever you want. No question. The question is it a Rishus Harabim mamish, or is it a simta, which is, let's call it a Carmelis, if you will. Okay, it's not owned, but it's not a throng. It's not a throng of people. So that's really the kasha here. So let's look at the Rashi, the second Rashi on this daf. Lo tikin lo rabbanan, shahare ein lo adam sham dalan amis miyuchedes. Because nobody has specific dalan amis in the Rishus Harabim. Shahar be chaverim yesh lo betocha omdim etzlo. So this is a little bit of a different thought. Arba amis, you really have to have arba amis. When it says dalan amis, it means dalan amis. In the Rishus Harabim, when you're wall to wall, can you imagine your Machne Yehuda on a Friday afternoon? I mean, come on, you don't have one amma. That's one of my favorite pastimes, is to be a Machne Yehuda Erev Shabbos. I mean, come on, it's wall to, it's like Times Square, Grand Central, whatever. So can that possibly be what Chazal is telling us? Rav Sheshes says no. You know where it is? You know, when you go to Machne Yehuda, you walk off to the side there, you have some breathing room on some of those alleys. That's where you can do it. When you have breathing room, not when you're in the throng of people. So that's a different view. So this is a machlekes, actually, Rav Sheshes and Rav Papa, as to whether or not a full Rishus Harabim is applicable in a full Rishus Harabim or not. L'chayra, it seems that it would not be applicable. Lo tekin rabbanan. Now, one more thing. It says, right? What does the Mishnah say? What does he say? B'chol makom. Rish Lakish says, so if it's B'chol Makom, how can you, Rav Sheshes, say that it is only in a Simta, not in a Rishus Harabim? This is the Kasha of Rav Sheshes. It says B'chol Makom. What does B'chol Makom mean? So he says, Kol Makom la'asuye tzidei Rishus Harabim. Okay, so now, remember Rashi said three things: a Simta, an alley, a Rishus Harabim mamish, and Sidei Rishus Harabim. So how do we define Sidei Rishus Harabim? So let me give you an example. If you're driving on the highway, then that's a Rishus Harabim. You pull off to the shoulder, that's Sidei Rishus Harabim. In other words, it isn't the Rishus Harabim where cars or people are walking maddening. Right off the Rishus Harabim, not in an alley, but right off the Rishus Harabim, there is a side road. That side road is populated, but not dochuk, not wall-to-wall people. So the Gemara comes to tell us, in support of Rav Sheshes, that Rav Sheshes can really be correct, that it's only Rishus Harabim, but it's also Tzidei Rishus Harabim. In other words, it's not only Simta, it's also Tzidei Rishus Harabim, but not Rishus Harabim Mamish, because in Rishus Harabim, nobody can do anything. You're literally, your hands, you're walking with your hands by your side because you can't do anything. It's a throng of people. So this remains the machlokes between Rav Papa and Rav Sheshes, but at least Rav Sheshes is being for-emphasized because we're saying that the kol makom doesn't mean Rishus Harabim mamish. It also means Sidei Rishus Harabim, the sides of the Rishus Harabim. Okay, so that's the end of this sugya. We have a few minutes. So I'll just touch on the next sugya, but really it's going to require our going into it in more detail next week. So as we know from all of our experiences, that when the Gemara tells us, for instance, it tells us something about Rosh Lakish, so the Gemara finds a convenient place to include another principle of Rosh Lakish, which may or may not be directly impacting our Gemara. So that's the case here. Because we brought down the halacha of Rosh Lakish before, we're going to bring down another halacha of Rosh Lakish. And this is as follows. We'll just whet our appetite. Ketana, a minor girl, meaning a young girl who is not yet of mature age, is not a bas mitzvah. Ein lo chotzer ve'ein lo arba amas. A pronouncement. She has no chotzer and she has no arba amas. What is a chotzer? We know that a chotzer means that your courtyard can be kona for you. So you or I or any adult, we have a chotzer. We have a chotzer, the chotzer can kona. We have arba amas can be kona. Says Rosh Lakish in the name of Rav Abba Kohen Bardale, a ketana, a young girl, ein lo chotzer ve'ein lo arba amas. She doesn't have either. We'll see in a minute what that means. But Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yanai Omar, yesh lo chotzer v'yesh lo arba amas. No, she has both. She has a chotzer and arba amas. So just let's understand what we're talking about. It says Rashi, ketana ein lo chotzer, im zorek lo bala get. Remember that the principle of chotzer is chotzer shel adam kamohu. The chotzer of a person is like him. And what's the classic case? The classic case is the Gemara in Gittin, where a man wants to divorce a woman and he comes to within her general environment. Instead of handing it to her, he can throw the get into her chotzer. She has a nice little home with a gate, with everything else. So the Gemara says he can throw it into the chotzer. Says Rashi, im zorek lo bala get. Now, a man may marry a minor. You can marry a minor. So now she's your wife, and you want to divorce her. What do? Im zorek lo bala gita l'ter chatzera lo konsolo chasera l'sgarishbo. This principle tells us that you must deliver to in her hand. You can't throw it into her courtyard, and she should be garish. Right? If she's standing in Rishus Harabim, bezerkel get ba'arba amoseha. Okay, so chotzer is one thing, arba amos is something else. So you can't throw it into the chotzer, And now he's telling us you can't even throw it in the Rosh Hashanah in her Dalet Amas, Afagaf, the Gedola Migrasha, even though a woman of majority age would be divorced under that circumstance. It says the Gemara there in Gittin, Hazarik get leishto, B'soch Beisa, or Hoisa Omedes B'Shusarab Mizarkala Karov Lo Migareshes. So, but that is a Gedola, a woman of mature age, meaning she's over 12 in a day. Yes, but a Katana, low. So that's the principle of Rosh Lakish. So he announces that she has no chotzer. Rabbi Yochanan, Mishra Rabbi Yanama, yesh lo chotzer, yesh lo arba amas. She has a chotzer and an arba amas. So on its face, what are we talking about? Why does one say yes and why does one say no? So we'll touch on this, and this will be the push off for next week, because this gets much more in depth. What's the machlekes? Okay, the my komiflige. What is Rosh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan arguing? What's the machlekes? Mar sover chotzer mishum yoda is rabbe. One person says we learned chotzer from yad. We'll see what that means in a minute. Ki heicha de islay yad chotzer name in islay, where you have yad. In other words, where you have a hand, you have a chotzer. That's Rabbi Yochanan's position, because Rabbi Yochanan said that you may throw it into her chotzer, or dalet amis. Umar Sava and Rav Lakish holds chotzer mishum shlichus is rabbi. We don't learn it from yad, we learn it from shlichus. What does it mean from shlichus? It means from being a shaliach, an agent. V'chihecha the shalichus leslei, chotzer nami leslei. So where there's no shlichus, there's no chotzer. So the basic distinction, the basic argument between Rosh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan surrounds this question. Okay, so now, if we want just to begin to understand this, let's look at the Rashi. This is an important Rashi. Mishum Yoda is Rabbe. What does it mean because of hand? What does that mean? I learned it because of hand. The Ksiv. By Gittin, it says V'nosam biyoda. He gave it into her hands. V'yoda reshusa mashma. And yad is a reshus. That's a proper reshus. You put it into my hand is attached to my body, it's me, you gave it to me. Right? However, the Gemara tells us that when it's talking over there by the conquest of Moab, Vayikach is called arzo miyodo. It uses the term miyodo, and it says they took the land of Moab. It didn't take it from his hand. Miyodo means from his possession. He had big lands. In other words, the word yad is a euphemism for territory.
Right, it's not literal.
It's not literal. That's the point. So if you learn it from yad, what is yad? The Torah tells us yad is all your possessions. Now I understand. So Rabbi Yochanan says if you learn it from yad, then you can chotzer works, because chotzer is your possession. Dalet amas is your possession, right? That makes sense. If you're learning it from yad, then it means the larger thing. Rosh Lakish, on the other hand, mishum shlichus is rabbi. Midirabi rachmana shlichus la'odam. It has to do with being a shaliach, kedetanya. V'shalach. The Gemara in Kedushin tells us if you make a shaliach, malamed shoy is osha shaliach, v'shalcho malamed shoy isha osha shaliach. In that case, ish and isha are both they are over the age of majority. An ish and an isha is not a katana. An ish is a man, an isha is a woman, and it says you can make a man a shaliach and a woman shaliach. She'isha osha shaliach israbi nami chatzera dahavale kishlucha. Now we can include a chotzer, because chotzer can be my shaliach. But here we're talking about a katana. Rish Lakish made the point that a katana can't have a chotzer and then we say can't have dalet amis. Why? Because the whole principle of shlichus applies only to an adult. the principle of a hand, okay, a hand means possession. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan can say it means everybody else. Rish Lakish says, we learn it from shlichus. Shlichus can't be for a cotton. A minor can't be a shliach. So that's now the principle of the argument. So Mitzvah Shem, when we go through the rest of this Gemara, it'll be a very intricate understanding of the discussion of shlichus and not shlichus and yad, what one means, what the other means. But just to keep it in context, because we've been juxtaposing Dalet Amis and Chotzer. So let me just make the point very clearly that Dalet Amis is a rabbinic principle. Chotzer is a Torah principle. In other words, they are roughly the same, but the Rabbanan instituted Dalet Amis. The Torah says your possession. It doesn't say Dalet Amis, it says your possession. What's your possession? Your Chotzer is your possession, right? Comes the Rabbanan and says, you know what? I'm going to extrapolate from that Dalet Amis Shel Adam Shalo, that a person has Dalet Amis, but it's rabbinic in nature. Chotzer is midoraisa. So when we now use them interchangeably, we're saying both the Torah possession and the rabbinic possession are the same. In other words, this principle of yad and shlichus applies equally well to Chotzer as it does to Dalet Amis. We're not making a distinction. Whether it's rabbinic or whether it's midoraisa, the underlying principle of shlichus versus yad is one and the same. I just want to make that point because that's going to come up a lot as we continue our discussion, is we're going to see that we go back and forth sometimes between Chotzer and Dalet Amis. So let's not confuse them. One is the Raisa, one is the Rabbanan, but for our purposes, they are the principles are the same as to whether or not you can be kind of. Okay. All right. So Mitzvah Shem will pick up from next week. And if there's any questions, but so now we see there's a whole different parsha here in Metzia as to whether or not what someone can do. Now, remember, we kept saying that you have to do a kinyan in order to be kona, right? Hagbah, Mashiach, Masira. That was our whole discussion over the last few blot. What we learned today is that there is a takanas chachamim that tells us that a person has Dalet Amis that he can acquire even without doing a kinyan. That's the important principle, is that the rabbis now enlarged, but to a very limited degree, right? Because we're talking about someone who has a right to something. Remember, it's a right to something. So even though it's not his initially, he has a right to something. So the Torah says that right will give you, not to have machlokes, we're going to say your Dalet Amis is yours, so people shouldn't be on top of each other, fighting over everything that. Now, today, obviously, it doesn't apply. It's finders keepers. I mean, the first person in, he gets it. There's no such thing as an automatic kind of. We're not, because we don't. Again, midrabanan, it should, actually between Yidden, it should be. If I had the Chanukah didn't go away because because we're living in 2020. So if we're applying our halachas and you went to Bezdin, the Bezdin would say, was it in your Dalet Amis? If Taka was your Dalet Amis, then it should be your. Where do you come to take it away from his Dalet Amis? So that should still apply today if you're going to Bezdin. Not if you're going to go to secular court. I doubt the court is going to give you Dalet Amis. All right. So we'll go from here next week.
Where are we starting next week?
Thank you.
We're going to start in the middle of Yud Amid Beis. We'll just quickly review the principles of Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, and we'll go from here in the middle of Yud Amid Beis, the discussion of a katana, a young girl who, whether or not she can have Dalet Amis or not Dalet Amis. It's a very interesting Gemara that will go back and forth. But there's two views. There's Rish Lakish's view that she cannot, and the Rabbi Yochanan's view that she can, because each holds a different principle. Rabbi Yochanan holds the principle of yad, that it's her hand, and her hand has kinyan. And Rish Lakish says no, that the principle is shlichus, agency, and a girl cannot be an agent. So since that's clearly defined, we can now, the Gemara next week will go through all of that, and we'll see how that plays out.
So you got to figure that Rish Lakish, at least from his days as a highwayman, sure knew his way around the Rishus Rabbin.
Yeah, he did.
He's a highwayman,
Highwayman, right?
Shkoach, Rabbi.
All right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Everybody have a good week, a safe week.
Good week.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you very much.